This is Stanley Military Cemetery in Hong Kong. In the fall of 1941, 2,000 Canadian soldiers came here to garrison the colony. It was considered one of the safest and cushiest postings they could get. No one could believe that within 3 weeks, these men would be fighting for their lives. This is the grave of John Baker. He was killed in action at Hong Kong, December 25th, 1941, aged 18. He was one of the first Canadian soldiers to fight and die for king and country.
Hong Kong, a city aimed at the future. But only a few minutes from the skyscrapers and the crowded streets are shattered pillboxes and abandoned tunnels, silent reminders of a desperate past. October 1941. The dark shadow of tyranny has fallen across the world. Everywhere the Axis powers are victorious. In Asia, Japanese armies, in an orgy of looting, rape, and murder, are cutting a path of devastation through China. The empires of Britain and Japan are still at peace, but directly in the path of Japan's relentless march towards the immense wealth of Southeast Asia lies Britain's colony, Hong Kong.
The Japanese have every reason to attack Hong Kong. Britain's far eastern outpost lies athwart the Japanese line of communications to the south. Mr. Churchill, on behalf of us all, has sent a heartening message to Hong Kong, to which the governor replied, "We intend to do our best."
Soon Hong Kong will experience its hour of darkness. When Britain decides to reinforce its Hong Kong garrison, the Canadian government, eager to see its army in action, volunteers 2 battalions: the Winnipeg Grenadiers and the Royal Rifles of Canada, 2,000 untried troops.
Daddy, let me stay out late, for tomorrow is our wedding day. Can't the baby kind of celebrate? Oh, kiss the boys goodbye.
On October 27th, 1941, the 2,000 young men set sail from Vancouver on the steamer Awatea. With the Royal Rifles of Canada is a 22-year-old signalman, William Allister.
It sounded too wonderful to be true. A dream of glory and crazy freedoms, of breathless escapades, laughing in the face of death. You were Douglas Fairbanks Jr., passing through the inferno unscathed. We found ourselves crammed into the bowels of the boat, several flights below deck. 2/3 of the boat were graciously cordoned off for officers only, to keep out the lowlife. We slept in hammocks over our mess tables, 2 pairs of sweaty feet on either side of my face. At last, after 3 long weeks, this interminable voyage, sailing and drinking and dreaming, did draw to a close. The island of Hong Kong came into view. It was the beginning. We entered Hong Kong harbor on a bright tropical morning, November 1941. The air was throbbing with explosive excitement. Wonderful rib-sailed junks, sampans right out of National Geographic. Kowloon, our first Asian city.
We're in Hong Kong Harbor, and you can actually see Hong Kong off to the left and Kowloon off to the right. On November 16, 1941, the 2,000 Canadians of Sea Force made this exact same trip. During the trip, they had been warned about the Japanese, but whatever their concerns were, they were soon forgotten by the exotic delights of Hong Kong.
The garrison has been reinforced with Canadian troops here seen arriving. All of them are volunteers since the war began, and all of them are obviously in the highest spirits. After disembarking, they march towards the town on the way to their billets. They must have proved a very heartening sight for the mixed population.
The governor of Hong Kong welcomes the men of Sea Force, led by a veteran officer, Brigadier John Lawson. The 2,000 men go into billets just outside Hong Kong's twin, the mainland city of Kowloon, just 40 kilometers from the encampments of the Japanese army. But to the raw Canadian troops, the Japanese and the threat of war seem far away.
The Canucks were doing the town. MPs braced themselves for a heavy night. Prostitutes were out in force. Beer poured down thirsty gullets, and volleys of uninhibited bellowing, hooting, yelling echoed over the roofs of the colony. 3 short weeks. War so far away, and life a continual party.
While the Canadians revel in the exotic pleasures of Hong Kong, 60,000 battle-hardened Japanese troops move into position facing the colony's border. In the hills above Kowloon City, the British have built an 18-kilometer-long defensive line known as the Gin Drinkers Line. If the Japanese attack, the British estimate the line will be able to hold them off for at least 2 weeks.
These are 2 entrances into the Shingmeng Redoubt. You can tell by the name Shaftesbury. This one's Regent, but they were built by Londoners. These positions were built in the 1930s as part of a major defense system called the Gin Drinkers Line. There have been threats of Japanese invasions for a long time, and the British had built these as a precaution. There are interconnected tunnels running all the way through the mountains, and of course, this was going to be the first line of defense should the Japanese come. There's a great view from the top.
The labyrinth of fortified bunkers and tunnels is designed to be defended by hundreds of men. But in December 1941, it is manned by only 45 British soldiers.
From heights like this one, the British could observe Japanese troop movements. But of course, this was nothing new. There had been a threat of Japanese invasion for more than 4 years, and there really was a sense of complacency throughout the colony. But that would all change on December the 8th, 1941.
December 8th, 1941. Japan attacks throughout the Pacific and Southeast Asia. Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, Malaya, and at the first light, 20,000 Japanese troops surge over the northern frontier of the colony of Hong Kong.
This is one of the tunnels of the Shingmeng Redoubt that actually leads right down into the mountain. And this is a ventilation shaft, and as you can see, it's not covered. And in war, this is a disaster. Around midnight on December the 9th, the Japanese infiltrated these positions and then came along, dropping grenades into the ventilation shafts, and then blew holes in the tunnels themselves, jumped in, and drove out the Royal Scots.
Within hours, the Japanese capture the Shingmeng Redoubt, shattering the British defense line. Mass panic grips the mainland city of Kowloon. Thousands of people rush the port, desperate to cross to Hong Kong Island. Among the Canadians evacuating their barracks is William Allister.
We got our equipment on 2 trucks and went roaring through the streets, rifles cocked for snipers, people running everywhere. It was bedlam. Looters being shot all around us. One drunken police sergeant was shooting at anyone, looter or not. Good, clean fun. The shore was lined with people with no way to cross. They knew what happened when the Japs took a city.
The loss of Kowloon is a huge blow, leaving Hong Kong isolated more than 1,000 kilometers behind enemy lines. Now, all that lies between the Japanese army and Hong Kong Island is a narrow channel of water and the undermanned British garrison with its 2,000 newly arrived Canadian troops. On December 13th, Japanese troops take control of the city of Kowloon. Now, with the mainland secure, Japanese guns are moved into position to pour fire across the harbor onto the last British stronghold, the island of Hong Kong.
Nippon flings down the gauntlet. The army attacks Hong Kong, the base of Jam Bull's predatory action in East Asia for a century. In accordance with Bushido, Nippon demands surrender, but the British refuse. The siege of Hong Kong begins.
This is Hong Kong Harbor, and you can see across the channel the new territories and Kowloon. After December 13th, the Japanese had total control of this area, and they brought all their artillery forward. And they started a 6-day bombardment on various positions on the Hong Kong island. They managed to set alight the oil storage tanks and a number of factories, and by December 18th, this whole area was shrouded in smoke. They knew an invasion was coming, but they didn't know where and they didn't know when.
Observing the bombardment from the heights overlooking the harbor and taking shelter in a pillbox is signaller William Allister.
The whole area from the harbor straight up to the Wang Ni Chong Gap was devastated with a deadly and incessant shelling. It seemed about to blow our measly little pillboxes to smithereens. We lay on the floor waiting for shells to land. Our pitiful pillbox walls seemed paper thin. We listened to the artillery. Here they come. The first sickening whoosh of air hissing death. Stop. Let me live. With shaking fingers, Demont passed me a cigarette. He forced a sickly smile. Time, he said, goes so fast when you're having fun.